Some public figures fall from grace because of one mistake, but others leave a trail of warning signs so bizarre, so unsettling, that you start to wonder how the world didn't see it coming. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is one of those cases. Long before investigations, scandals, and the collapse of his public image, guests and insiders were quietly sharing stories that sounded less like the behavior of a grown man and more like someone testing how far his privilege could take him. These weren't minor quirks, they were moments that made people freeze, barging into rooms uninvited, playing childish pranks that left women humiliated, turning private gatherings into opportunities for power games that no one felt safe calling out. And what's striking is how consistent these accounts are. Different people, different years, yet the same themes: entitlement, intrusion, and a fascination with pushing boundaries just to watch others react. By the time the world finally paid attention, the pattern had already spanned decades. His downfall didn't begin with recent headlines. It began the moment people realized this wasn't immaturity. It was a long-standing habit of seeing what he could get away with. And the stories you're about to hear make that crystal clear. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. Long before Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor became a walking headline, the red flags were already waving. His behavior as a teenager didn't just hint at trouble, it practically announced it. One of the earliest stories comes from when he was just 17, staying at a house party filled with young guests. In the middle of the night, he reportedly burst into a group of girls' bedroom, claiming he couldn't sleep because there was a ghost in his room. Instead of dealing with it himself, he asked if he could climb into their bed. They kicked him out immediately. But what stood out wasn't the excuse, it was how comfortable he felt barging in without hesitation. Another young woman recalled a similarly intrusive moment. She had been brushing her teeth when he strolled straight into her ensuite bathroom. Without embarrassment or apology, he began lecturing her on how she was doing it wrong, as if he had every right to step through the doorway. For many, it was their first glimpse of someone who didn't recognize boundaries because he never had to. Even at this early stage, the pattern was clear. He wasn't seeking connection, he was seeking reactions. Shock value seemed more important than respect, and the people around him learned quickly that he enjoyed catching others off guard. But as he grew older and as his access expanded, the behavior didn't fade, it escalated, and the stories from his adulthood reveal just how far he took it. As Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor grew older, his idea of fun became a series of stunts that left other people embarrassed rather than amused. At one gathering, he told a woman a dish smelled strange. When she leaned in, he shoved her face into it and laughed while she wiped the food off her cheeks. Another guest described waking to him standing over her with a fire extinguisher. Before she could react, he sprayed her, then moved on to other rooms to repeat the same trick, delighted by the chaos he caused. People who attended private events said these moments were common. He pushed guests into conga lines while shouting "choo-choo," forced awkward closeness with a fruit-passing game under the chin, and pulled off his infamous mustard trick, telling someone to clap with an open tube hidden between their palms, sending it straight into their face. These weren't playful pranks among friends. They were one-sided power plays aimed at people who felt they couldn't say anything. And the more he realized no one would challenge him, the bolder he became. As Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor gained more freedom, his behavior shifted from childish antics to something far more intrusive. Guests at country house gatherings spoke about his late-night inspections, where he wandered the halls and pushed open any door with a light still on. One woman said he looked her over and casually remarked that he was shopping for entertainment, a comment that made her skin crawl. Others recalled him standing silently outside their rooms, listening before bursting in with forced laughter. His official trips showed the same pattern. During a visit to Egypt, he reportedly jumped into a pool fully clothed and dragged a hostess in after him, leaving her humiliated while he found the moment hilarious. At another event, he snatched a pair of ceremonial gloves off a senior officer mid-speech and tossed them into the crowd, turning a formal occasion into a spectacle centered around himself. In each case, the reaction was the same: shock, awkward silence, and people unsure whether they were allowed to object. His status created a shield, and he used it freely. But the moments that unsettled people the most weren't the pranks, they were the public encounters that showed how little respect he had for the women around him. The most troubling accounts came from public events, where Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's behavior wasn't hidden behind closed doors. Broadcaster Tanya Breyer recalled him walking up behind her at a society gathering and unzipping her dress in full view of the room. It wasn't playful. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was done for the amusement of those watching, and she was left standing there stunned. Another young woman described meeting him at a dinner at Windsor. When she mentioned she worked as a secretary, he loudly announced to the entire table that her job sounded terribly dull, turning her introduction into a punchline. Others said he fixated on crude jokes, often directed at women, and seemed to enjoy pushing conversations into uncomfortable territory, just to see people react. Even his peers noticed the pattern. They described him as someone who used humiliation as entertainment, especially when the target was a young woman or a staff member who couldn't risk talking back. What stood out wasn't one single incident, it was the steady stream of them. By this point, the reactions were no longer surprise or confusion. People simply expected trouble when he entered a room. But those patterns didn't just shape his reputation, they set the stage for the collapse that would follow. For years, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor moved through scandals and complaints with little consequence, but eventually the pattern caught up with him. Public trust collapsed after a series of damaging associations and allegations resurfaced, especially those connected to Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Giuffre, accusations he has publicly denied, but which triggered intense scrutiny and relentless media coverage. Then came the interview that changed everything. His televised conversation on Newsnight was meant to clear the air. Instead, it destroyed what remained of his credibility. Viewers weren't just unconvinced, many were stunned by his tone, his explanations, and the glaring disconnect between his words and the seriousness of the situation. Overnight, the public mood shifted from uneasy curiosity to outright rejection. The fallout was immediate. He stepped back from public duties. His remaining privileges were removed. King Charles ordered him to leave Royal Lodge, a home he'd occupied for decades. Every attempt to re-enter public life was met with backlash, and fresh reports only pushed him further into isolation. Even leaked emails and insider accounts continued to emerge, keeping his name in headlines long after he retreated from the spotlight. What became clear was that this wasn't a sudden downfall triggered by one moment. It was the final stage of a long decline that had been building for years, shaped by behavior people quietly endured, tolerated, or felt unable to challenge. And now, with the official roles gone and the doors of public life firmly closed, the world is left looking back at the stories that always hinted this ending was coming. These stories don't just reveal a downfall, they show how long a pattern can survive when no one feels allowed to speak up.
But now the curtain has been pulled back and people are finally talking. What do you think? Should more witnesses come forward? Should the institution have acted sooner? And what does this say about the culture that protected him for so long? Share your thoughts below. I read every single comment. And if you want more deep dives just like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.